Steve Moran here. Welcome to another episode of Foresight Live. We are talking about the future of senior living and how to make leadership in senior living better. My guests are Fara Gold McLaughlin, who you know well, and Scott Eckstein, who I'm sure a lot of you know, who leads the senior living program at Boston University. And we're about to have a great conversation. But first, this.
Hey guys, Steve Moran here.
Scott,
I always
Fara,
get a
welcome.
giggle. I always get a
Hi,
giggle
Steve.
with that intro. I think it's so much fun.
Yeah,
Steve?
I love the crooked glasses thing. It's like real life. I've tried to get them fixed, and now I'm not sure I can get them fixed because it's such a part of the look, right?
It's the brand. Exactly. It's the brand. Speaking of brands, I'm just so excited to be here and that you've invited Scott Eckstein because he is creating a name for himself. As you know, he helped the Granger Cobb Institute over 5 years launch their undergraduate program, but now he's so excited because we've finished the first semester at Boston University's School of Hospitality in their graduate program in senior living. So, and Scott, we just saw your article that ran on mentorship. So I know we're really excited to kind of have you tell us what those big picture ideas are about workforce and helping us today with those. That's the core problem that all operators are needing is great qualified leaders.
Yeah, well, thank you, Farah. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you having me. Yeah, we just finished our first cohort for all 3 classes in our senior living concentration at BU in our graduate program. We're really, really well, and it's all about taking students to the next level. We have to bring the entire idea of senior living management to the next level. We've got to mentor these students. Actually, they're managers at the graduate program. A lot of them have actually been working for a while, so they know what they're doing. And now we're just teaching them about senior living space and culture and the resident experience, as you know, Farah, and just about the business in general. And they get exposed to different executives talking about different areas, and I get to chat with them about just every aspect. So we give them a broad view of what the business is all about.
So I want to actually start with, let me ask a couple questions here. If I'm in the audience looking at this, watching this conversation, probably going to be one of 2 questions. If I'm a leader of a large organization, I'll be thinking, maybe the first thing I'm thinking is maybe I should go do this. And the second thing I might be thinking is who in my organization should I be sending to participate in this? And so I want to talk about those, but I think we actually have to hit one other question first. So is this a residency program, or is it an online program, or a hybrid? How does that work?
Sure. Currently, the first cohort was an in-person, face-to-face program on campus. But starting next year, we're going to have we're calling an executive program, a weekend program. Each class will be 2 long weekends and the rest online. So you'll be able to, you can go from anywhere, whether it be Washington or Seattle or London or Spain to Boston for 2 weekends and do the rest online. So it really opens up the world literally for us as far as students and companies interested in taking their managers to the next level.
So is that just 2 weekends for the whole program?
Each class is 2 full weekends.
Got it.
Yeah, we have to get the hours in, Steve.
Gotcha. Well, I don't know. I just barely graduated from college, right? So this probably is what I need. Maybe I couldn't even get in.
Oh, you would love it.
Yeah, we get you in, Steve, somehow, some way.
That's
cool.
Right.
Okay, let's go back to my earlier question. Yeah. Who's this for?
Steve, that's a good question, and I've asked that a lot. And it's obviously for a lot of people, but if I had to narrow it down to a few different cohorts, it's the rising star in a senior living company, whether that be a rising star at the corporate level, a rising star in a community, an executive director that you want to take to the next level, a retention. We've got a lot of executive directors and managers that are sort of burnt out. So before we lose them, maybe we sort of give them a chance to become, in the case of BU, a terrier, and be a student of the industry for a little while, and ask them to stay on for a couple of years. You also have folks that are, hospitality got really walloped when it came to the pandemic, and a lot of folks are, with all this wonderful hospitality background, are interested in where they can take these skills and understand the senior living business, because obviously there's a lot of connections. Why we're in the School of Hospitality at Boston University, and we were the same at Washington State. So they can understand the business. And the great thing about, the university setting is we talk about all different aspects of the business. You can learn a lot on the job. Absolutely. You can learn the job. But, we get to talk about everything from customer experience, sales and marketing, technology. We talk about these things in depth. So it's been really fascinating. As Steve, you and Fara spoke in one of the classes when it came to digital marketing and social media. And I think that was a pretty good class. Students asked some really tough questions. And I think they got a lot out of it. So thank you.
So I really love this. I think that, as you say, Scott, learning on the job is super important. Absolutely believe that that's true. However, two things that I see as I look at leadership in senior living. The first is that if you learn on the job in the wrong environment, you might get some bad habits.
That's a big problem. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's what I was trying to feed you a line.
You fed me really well, Steve. That's one of the reasons, the article, the piece, the blog that's you kind of published, it was about mentorship. One of my soapboxes when I was at Washington State teaching undergrads was management training programs. What, I talked about in my article is students would come to my class there, and they would be, I ask every single first class, is, why are you here? And 9.99 times out of 10 is because they needed 3 credits. Steve, I was a senior living class at an undergraduate school, so it wasn't the top choice. The students would rather be taking the wine tasting class than my class, which is understandable. I probably want to take it too. But after talking about the industry, talking about care services, talking about customer experience, and taking students on a field trip, they would start coming to me after class. And over time, over the years I taught at Washington State, I was able to get a bunch of students interested in the space, but they don't want to be concierge. There's nothing wrong with those jobs, but they don't want to be concierges. They don't want to be activity assistants. They want to get into a management track. So management training, because that's what they're competing against, that's what we are competing against in a School of Hospitality. It's the Marriotts, the Hiltons, the Hyatts, the Four Seasons, the Ritz-Carltons that have management training programs and are taking students, through those programs. We need to do the same thing if we're going to create a cadre of managers for the future. And at BU, we've got the same thing. But one of the things I learned, with those students, as I mentored them, was not everybody is a good mentor. And it's actually a skill that's important and something that has to be wanted. If you place a student someplace, a graduate into a community, that's great. And the community actually may be a great community. But if the manager doesn't want to or doesn't know how to mentor a student, you got a problem. And honestly, we lost a bunch of really good potential managers because they had terrible experiences with that. So one of the things we're working on at BU with Dr. Taylor Payton at BU on a mentorship training program, sort of a scalable program, because it's such an important skill to have. And I think all of us can think about, we've had mentors. I could think of, a number of mentors I've had in my career who I wouldn't be here today talking to you if I didn't have them.
So one of the conversations that I had with several different leaders at Argentum that were just coming off of, one of the questions I would ask would be how operators are doing with their occupancy. And very, very grateful at how many people were really transparent with me about how they're doing. They were shared in confidence, so I wouldn't begin to talk at all about any specifics. But the big theme that I found was that they would have buildings that were high performing, high occupancy, and buildings that were really struggling. And there was a common reason that the buildings were doing great, and the buildings that were struggling. You know what it is? I'm sure you do.
What is it, Steve?
Huh?
What is it?
It's all the executive director, right? And so you have, what ends up happening is you have these executive directors who just seem to be lucky every place they go. Except that it's not really luck at all, right?
No, it's not luck.
And so what you're doing, Scott, I think is really helping to give that luck to your students.
I want to give them the magic sauce, that special sauce, as we talk about in the industry. And one thing I noticed when I was doing turnarounds for different operators was every time I was in a building that was struggling, it always had to do with management. Either somebody took their eye off the ball, somebody was burnt out, there was a toxic environment of some kind. It always had to do with management, because if the attention was given at the level it needed to be, I wouldn't have had a job doing those turnarounds.
That's right.
So something was missing, and either the culture sort of disappeared, or there was a toxic environment of some kind, or somebody, honestly was just burnt out and things were let go, and the attention wasn't given. So management, at whether it be the community level or even the regional level, honestly, falters. And we have to do better when it comes to that. And idea that things that we're talking about at the university when it comes to this stuff is sort of paying attention to that. Pay attention to emotional intelligence, and concepts like that really make a difference when you're dealing with people. So, empathy is a critical component of our business, maybe more so than many other businesses. And I would go into communities when there was really no empathy at all. So it's something that we have to keep top of mind.
So why don't you go ahead, Fara?
Well, I can speak to the invitation to be a part of this type of program and the way the syllabus was written. So if I was an investor watching today and an operator where I know I may have a problem, this is where you'd want to come to us, because Scott developed the curriculum so that a leader, like he just said, can see the holistic part, emotional intelligence, but also a market opportunity. So if you have a student that's working both, how do the staff feel, how do the residents feel, but what does the market want? And those big topics he could condense into that curriculum. So now those students that came out of just this semester have a toolbox that took me 15 years to develop. And it was one semester. And so, they are ready and ripe for a management company as well as for an investor.
It's one of the reasons, in Fara's right on target, one of the reasons the program at BU, which I can speak to, includes 3 classes, and there's specific classes. There's a senior living operations class, which we talk about what's going on inside a community, because that's obviously important, everything from active adult through the spectrum to memory care, and we talk about person-centered care and how that fits into the program. And we have the business of senior living, which is a sort of a REIT, 30,000-foot view of the industry, looking at things from a cultural standpoint, an asset management standpoint, capital structure standpoint. So you understand the business of senior living. Then we have the course that Fara taught, the resident journey. We have the resident view, sort of the anthropology of the resident decision to move into senior living and the processes that go in there and how technology impacts that, whether it be at the active adult side or at the memory care assisted living side. So it gives the students a really broad view of the industry, which I think is important if we're going to be developing leaders for the future.
Yeah, and as Nancy commented,
Hey, Nancy.
It's all about the people, and Nancy's with the University of Washington.
The state of Washington State. I have to
Washington State. I'm sorry, I knew I was going to get it wrong, which meant there, and we'll actually have her as a guest on a future episode to talk about their program, which is an undergraduate program. But it's all about the people. It's all about the people. And I know that as I talk, that's where my passion is. I know, Scott, you're doing a lot of stuff that the capital providers and sort of the nuts and bolts, and it actually is really important, but it starts with the people. And that's so important. So Fara, I actually want to turn to you for a little bit.
Thank you.
You taught a class. I'd like to just talk about that experience, the students, and what you learned, and how you see the future.
Well, it was such an honor of humility, first, and a big thank you to Scott for bringing me forward. That the process opened my heart up to how receptive people want to be, especially in the School of Hospitality, but any student. And they were committed at a level, because they're graduate students. They were committed to their own learning and their own humility to be able to ask questions about things. And an example was when I started the January, the first, and I went every week to Boston, which I also got a whole new perspective on how universities care for students. So at first I thought, well, can't this all be digital? Because I'm finishing a master's at Arizona State, all online. But what I saw was the stewardship of the student, which became an example. And then in our course, how we steward people in the business of caring for people. But my students in the resident journey and experience were afraid of death. And we talk about that in terms of length of stay and seniors housing, right? And I know investors want to get the active adult, let's get them at 50, right? And then they'll stay with us for 40 years. But what was so beautiful is after 13 weeks, the last course, I let the students pick the curriculum. I said, what do you want to talk about? And they said, we want to talk about death and dying. So they opened me as a teacher. And what I love about Scott, and then Leora Lance, the dean, is she really has cultivated an environment of guests. So you were a guest, but we had so many amazing, Justin Hutchins and Katie Potter. We had Joan Conklin from the Mind Lab. We had so many great thought leaders that I met for the first time at the age of 61 and a long, almost 4-decade healthcare career. So if I were someone looking to learn, or if I were an investor or an operator wanting that star to really stay connected to my company, I mean, it's a priceless education that does have a price. So we hope that companies will help sponsor that tuition. We have a vital financial aid program at Boston University, but education is expensive, right? And so again, I think if an organization wants to keep a high performer, there's no better way.
It's being cheap in the long run.
Yeah, so this is where I want to actually go someplace here a little bit, because let's just talk. What does the program cost, Scott? Ballpark?
A master's degree, it's about $50,000-$60,000.
Okay, so that sounds like a ton of money, right? But if I have
it is a good amount of money.
But if I have a building that's at 70%. Or 60% occupancy, or I talked to one operator who had a building that's at under 50%. How much money is that a month that stays on the table? If you say, I send somebody, I mean, maybe, and this may be too bold, I can probably do it because you probably would never do this, Scott. But let's say that by taking that leader and getting a transformed leader who is now leading that building, who's been through your building, and instead of being at 50% occupancy, it's at 90% occupancy, you pay for that education, every month?
Exactly.
Yeah. Just one resident, probably, national average is probably $60,000 a year. So that's essentially the price. But let me say, as far as Boston University, and I can only speak for BU, we do have tuition matching. So it's not totally $60,000, the company hopefully could share, and we like to see students have a skin in the game as well. So but if you're talking about the sort of rack rate of the price, right, is that, but
right,
makes difference in one resident, you've paid for it essentially.
That's right.
And
so I can still now. I want to be clear. I could still be working and with the intensive. I could still be working a full-time job and still come do this program.
Absolutely.
Right?
With our new program at BU, yes, it's an executive weekend program where it's each class is 2 weekends and online. So yeah, you can come in from Seattle or LA or from London or Madrid, or Dubuque. And
There you go. Dubuque.
right.
Come on, that's a shout out for Dubuque.
Or Sacramento.
Or
Sacramento
or Phoenix.
or Citrus Heights or any of those
Citrus
places.
Heights. That's right.
I mean,
right.
we had a couple of students that were already working in seniors housing, and that's that term sometimes we use, seniors housing technically, but they truly blossomed. Even though there were times they were like, gosh, I already know some of this. Then the next week would say, this blew my mind. And that's the part I think an investor and an operator want a leader that has a mind that's blown so that they don't have to pay, which they're going to pay either way, over a long tail career. We know we've got to staff, we've got to get executive directors that are entrepreneurial. They're going to learn that spirit. And I saw it in one of the last courses, the capstone finals in Scott's operations class, where 2 of my students said, come and see my presentation, professor. And I said, okay. I was blown away by the caliber of commitment. They did a feasibility study, and we had a capital partner in the audience who actually was taking notes because they fleshed out a feasibility that an investor would pay $100,000, $150,000 for. And that was a real project that has an application in a development world. So that's the type of example of priceless.
Well, Steve, I've been in the industry for about 30 years, which is kind of frightening to actually say that out loud. But with all the speakers that I've brought in, I'm learning things from these conversations. So, we go into items in depth and we have amazing discussions, which sort of, when I talk about taking things to the next level, it takes everybody to the next level. And that's sort of what it's all about, is we have to get people engaged. We have to get the students engaged. We got to have them talking about these topics, thinking about what's next. What is next? When they're going to be executives in this industry, we're going to be in a completely different place as far as the industry goes. And it's changing. And we talk about that change every single day. We have to give them the basics, but then we talk about where it's going next. And it's amazing what you can learn from the students themselves. We had a student that was she was pre-med, then she wants to go into senior living, and she's a manager at Target now. We had one who's an asset manager with a senior living related investment company. We had a bunch of international students that came with some interesting backgrounds as well. We even had an activity assistant at an assisted living community there. So, and the conversations in class are just priceless. And sometimes they're shocking and surprising, but they're always interesting.
Okay, so I want to dig into this. Talk to me a little bit about shocking and surprising kinds of conversations that you've had.
One of the most interesting conversations I had was actually when I was teaching at Washington State, and I was teaching in Brigg, Switzerland, at the program Washington State has with the Cesar Ritz College, and it was a completely international student body. We have international student bodies there, but we were talking seriously international student body. I had Bulgaria, Costa Rica, Russia, China, Japan. It just goes on, and we also had Seattle and Vancouver. So it was completely international. Right. And when we talk about, in the U.S., we talk about the social model and the institutional and medical model. Well, you can't use those terms all the time, because when I talk about a social model with somebody from Bulgaria, it has a completely different meaning. And the idea that people would actually pay for senior living infuriated some of the students. So it created some interesting, fascinating conversations. And one student in particular from Bulgaria, who I ended up having a lot of jousting with through the semester, ended up giving one of the best presentations for a for-profit with a partnership with the Bulgarian government senior living community. I think it's in Sofia, and it did an amazing job. And he was talking like, he was on board. You could have seen this presentation, in front of Ventas somewhere. It was just a great presentation. So to have a student go from that to giving an amazing presentation and having everything well thought out is just, it's shock and awe sometimes. Those kind of challenges. And we had a student also at BU this semester who did not like the idea that you have to pay for senior living. And I think we brought her around to understanding, mission and margin. We'll see how it goes with her career, but I think she's going to do just fine.
Okay, I'm gonna push on you just a little bit here, Scott. Maybe you too, Fara.
All right.
There was a study that came out a few weeks ago talking about what's the right phrase? Talking about how effective leaders were that came out of MBA programs, not senior living, just broadly MBA.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And then what the study said was fascinating and a lot disturbing, because what it said was that students who come out of MBA programs are really, really good at cutting expenses, and they're terrible at growing businesses. How do you avoid that trap in your program?
Well, I'm offended, Steve, because I have my MBA from NYU, the Stern School, and I don't think that way. So I have a problem with the study from the get-go. It's I think that's where understanding the business is. It's mission, margin. It's a long-term business in the short term. It's one of the reasons I've always had issues with senior living companies being public, but there's a purpose and a need for that. But it's really understanding what's going on. You have companies who are led by people who have been in operations like Ventas with Justin Hutchins, who understand what's going on in the community extraordinarily well, to an intimate level, and understand the needs and what makes sense at the community level, and that it is an up and down process. There's ebbs and flows in senior living. You can talk to any operator and say, I know in January, my occupancy is going to adjust because of what just happened in December, and there's a lot of other nuances. So you can only cut costs so much. You still have, which is one of the issues we have in middle market senior living. Operations, you got to pay for labor, you got to pay utilities, you got to pay taxes. All those things are essentially going to be the same, no matter what level of services you're providing. One of my business partners says, the pork chops are $3, and they're always going to be $3. Butcher's needs his $3. So we got to pay what we got to pay, but you can only cut expenses so far. Personally, I very recently in the past 2 weeks, I had to move my dad into assisted living, which after being in the business for about 30 years, I figured, I know what I'm talking about, and I knew what's supposed to happen. And I was unfortunately doing it from a distance, and I've had one of the most awful experiences. I'm not going to mention the operator, but it was a horrible, horrible experience where I'm sort of trying to tell my sister what to do because she was local, and nothing happened right. And a lot of it had to do with, honestly, staffing. They had staffing and training. The staff, I don't believe, was trained well. And I think the staff was kind of light to begin with. So all the things that should have happened didn't happen. And I'm seeing it all happen from a distance. So it's the point where I'm moving my dad out of that community into another community, which I'm being a little more actively involved in. But it comes down to, when I was doing turnarounds, it comes down to, as Nancy said, people. It's staffing and training. And we have to do better there. You can't skimp on that. If you do, you're going to end up being, out of business.
And I think that is the heart of that answer to your question, Steve. This is not your theoretical master's degree. We go on field trips, we go and see, they are doing applied studies. So I look at this as, a very hearty experiential, almost like in my bachelor's and postgraduate work in human development, where I had to spend 2,000 hours in a laboratory school. And so what we're doing at Boston University, and I would imagine the other universities want to do this as well, is so much experiential and not theoretical. And then by doing the experiential, we're creating entrepreneurs. We're creating people that are going to make decisions based on some sound experience, but also that meld of the theory, but they can see it at practice, and they're doing that at BU.
Thanks, Farah. And that's absolutely on target. BU is about experiences. It's very experiential. That's why we have the speakers come in and talk about what they're doing and students interacting with them. So we took them on a field trip, almost a full day, experiencing the community. It's all about.
Yeah, resident informed. Yep. We had Jack, one of our favorite advisors to Foresight. We literally had residents telling and sharing their disappointments, their hopes, their dreams. I never saw that before in any other program.
Yeah. So we are about out of town. I do want to add one bit of comment to what you talked about with your experience, Scott. I had the same problem with my mom. It was a terrible experience. I've talked to so many other senior living leaders. Wouldn't it be great in your program if you could somehow help have your people actually act as a family member and go select and go through that process of moving people in? I think it would be transformative. I think owners often don't know what happens in their own buildings and how they would be so embarrassed if they did. Scott, I know you have commentary. I don't have time to do that, but I did want to do one final thing with you. How do people find out about your program?
Feel free just to email me. You go to the website. My email address is scotteck@bu.edu. Look at me on LinkedIn. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on there. You can go to the BU School of Hospitality website, and you can find me on there. I'm happy to chat and discuss any of this.
Good. And we'll go back in and we'll drop some links into the posts on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube so you can find it. Scott, thank you very much. Farah, thank you very much.
Always
thank you for your passion for senior living, and we will be back next week.
Thank you.